Again.
Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a shame the member didn't watch One News. It gives me great pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to speak for. Yes, it's quite understandable, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to speak on the third reading of the New Zealand Health and Disability Amendment Bill, Mr. Speaker. I hope everyone listened to the Minister Ryle's speech at the commencement of the third reading. It covered the intent of this bill perfectly. Mr. Speaker, I've listened with sadness to the criticism of this bill and the attack on the motives of the government, and I can hold my head high knowing that this will make a difference, that this groundbreaking bill will lead eventually to a new environment for disabled people and their loyal, caring families. Mr. Speaker, those who live, work with and for the disabled know that this is progress. I look forward to this bill becoming law shortly.
Carol Beaumont.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make final contribution on the New Zealand Public Health and Disability Amendment Bill. And this bill is a response to the Court of Appeal decision in the Ministry of Health versus Atkinson and others case, essentially about family carers of disabled adults. And I think it is something that we probably would agree across the House, that caring is a critical issue in our country, that increasing numbers of us are caring for other New Zealanders. And I want to acknowledge tonight all of the carers, paid and unpaid, in this country who do an amazing job in looking after somebody else. And caring is work. Whether it's paid or unpaid, it is work, and often very difficult work. And it's often undertaken by women, in addition to everything else that they're doing. But I also want to acknowledge tonight the families who've worked so hard to get justice and to challenge discrimination. And this has led to this bill. But sadly, this response is flawed and limited. It's a limited response because it limits who can access payment as a family carer. It talks about very high need and high need. The definitions are still unclear and apparently to be further worked on. And looking at the bit of the regulatory impact statement, which does have some information in, it would seem that at least 3,800 families are excluded because of those definitions. Now, the extra cost of including those people, my colleague, the Honourable Marion Street, indicated this morning, could be as little as $16 million. And it's about priorities, Mr. Speaker. It's about priorities. Do we want to put more money into private education, or do we want to fund people who care for their family members? And it's also about government having the resources to do important social measures like this one. And I recall, as do many others, I'm sure, that this national government deliberately reduced the ability of government to pay for initiatives like this by cutting tax rates for the wealthiest New Zealanders and reducing government income as a consequence. So it's a limited response. It's also limited because the payment that family members will get is potentially lower than that provided to comparable support service workers. I would acknowledge, and one positive thing in this bill is that those workers have been deemed to be employees versus a possibility of them being given an allowance or being employed under a Section 88 notice. But these family employees can still be discriminated against. They can be paid less than other carers who are not family members, who are doing a comparable job. And for people on this side of the House, we believe in equal pay for equal work, and this includes the situation we're talking about tonight. We know across the House that that concept is not one that the government believes in. We've just recently seen youth rates introduced, which clearly indicates that they don't believe in equal pay for equal work. Why is work done by family members of less value? Why should it be paid less? And if we had a select committee process, that's one of the sorts of issues that could be discussed, and that the people doing the work could actually have their say on that. So, Mr Speaker, it's a limited response, but it will also extinguish the right to challenge discrimination under the Human Rights Act, and that is a very serious loss indeed. There are many questions that this bill raises, and we've tried to raise those questions today in this House, but the process is fundamentally flawed. Instead of a collaborative process as offered by opposition parties, the government has rammed this through urgency without full information. Everybody, I think, who's listening to Parliament now knows just how inadequate the regulatory impact statement is, full of pages like this with no information. That is disgusting. This should have gone to a select committee where those questions could have been answered. We should have had the information. This has been rushed through under urgency without full disclosure. We only got the regulatory impact statement today. So, Mr Speaker, it's not a surprise people are questioning the government's motives.
Jan Loki.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I would like